Welcome to Therapy Unplugged, Empowerment, Laughter, and Life, the podcast where two therapists offer insights to the real-life issues we all experience. We are your hosts, Sarah Benoit and Meaghan McCullough.
Hello and welcome back, listeners. It is Meaghan here with Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Meaghan. How are you?
I'm good. I am great. And so, getting us started in today's episode, I just wanted to share this one is a little bit different. And the way that it's different is that this is a topic that Sarah and I did not choose. I recently had a listener approach me and she asked me if we could do an episode on the idea of leaning into discomfort. So how do we lean into discomfort rather than run away from it, which or avoid it or deny it, which I think is a very natural human response that we sometimes all do. So, first of all, just wanted to give a shout out to our listener who brought this topic to our attention. I personally love it. I love this topic. I think too, I don't know about you, Sarah, but I think that being a mental health therapist, there's got to be a part of me, right, that does love to lean into discomfort or help others find that safe space
Mhm.
where they can lean into discomfort, right? Because otherwise, I don't think we'd be doing what we're doing. Um, I think it takes a lot of courage sometimes to step into the therapy office.
For sure.
Yeah, and, like, be willing to just kinda gently shine the light on whether a fear or a secret or just something that's causing you anxiety, so anyway, I really appreciate that the listener brought this topic to our attention.
Yes, I'm very excited. I will say, to kind of piggyback, I have not always been good about leaning into discomfort.
Mhm.
30 years ago, I was the one who would run from it. But, coming into this field, like you said, I mean, I think we have to have a certain comfort level with that and holding space so that others can do that kind of work because it isn't easy.
Exactly. Exactly, yeah, and so I thought maybe a good place to start is just to share a little bit more about what this listener shared with me.
Mhm.
I asked her what discomfort meant for her. And she said, when I think about discomfort, it means having something hanging over me that is unknown or uncertain and over which I have no control.
Okay.
And I thought that that was a great answer because I think that uncertainty in our lives can often be connected to this idea of something being uncomfortable,
Mhm.
right? Or being a challenge. I don't know about you, but many of the clients I think that come to see me, I don't hear a lot of clients saying, "Oh yeah, I love uncertainty in my life." You know, I think that there's a part of us that it's a very human response to just want everything in our control.
Mhm.
And this listener went on to say that when she's experiencing something that's very uncomfortable, she's in this place of ebb and flow where she goes back and forth between, like, trying to just go on with her life as normal
Mhm.
And she can do that maybe for a little bit, but in the background, if she hasn't dealt with whatever stressor, whatever discomfort, whatever challenge is coming up, if she hasn't dealt with it, what happens is that she'll then suddenly find herself, and these are her words, entering into that dark cloud of the issue or challenge or heaviness. It hits me, and then I'm going right back into that place of discomfort.
Mm.
And but without really feeling any kind of relief or resolution from it. So the question that she brought to us, and then I'll kind of hand it over to you and see if you have any thoughts
Sure.
on this. But I loved her question too.
Mhm.
So she said, how do I learn to coexist with the discomfort without it becoming all consuming and unhealthy?
Mm.
And the reason why I love that question is two parts. One, I love the word coexist in
Mhm.
this case because we're not suggesting, well, I'm not suggesting that you have to love the stress in your life or that you have to love whatever is making you feel uncomfortable. But if if something's coming up in your life that you have no control over, but which, let's face it, just really sucks,
Mhm.
that's the reality. And so if we're not coexisting with it, it it's like we're denying the reality of it.
Mhm.
And all that does is add another layer of stress or heaviness to the issue. And so how do I coexist with it? In my opinion, means how do I live with this and maybe even start to see it as a teacher? Is it
Mm.
possible to shift my perspective a little bit so that it doesn't become all consuming and unhealthy, as
Mhm.
this listener asks? So I'll hand it over to you and just see if you have any thoughts yet on this.
I think it's a great question. I think the first thing that any of us have to do is, and I think you're saying the same thing, but it's acknowledging its existence.
Yes.
If we can't, I mean, this is life, right? Life is not easy. Life isn't smooth sailing, no challenges. And I think that's how we kind of have not how we get to that place sometimes of not wanting to sit with discomfort, because I think there's a lot of, I mean, this is human nature, but there's a lot of comparison. There's a lot of, well, look at their life. Their life looks so easy. They don't have a worry in the world. They don't
Mhm.
struggle. And so if I want to be like that, I don't want to struggle. So I'm good. And then, like you said, if you're not acknowledging it or if you're pushing it away, it's going to come up like a freight train at the most inopportune time.
Right.
And it's going to feel huge, and it may become, like you say, unhealthy because it's all consuming and you don't know what to do with it. So I think part of it, like I said, to me, that first step is just acknowledging its existence. And when you do that, it can be very hard. You might feel like, you're looking down this deep dark tunnel or something.
Mhm.
But by doing that, it does make it less, for lack of a better way of putting it, big. Um,
Right.
it's you're coexisting, you're embracing it. Now, I'm not saying that's an easy process, and I'm not saying that you're just gonna be like, "Oh, cool, I can embrace this, no problem." Um,
Mhm.
but I think the first step is that willingness to say, "Okay, this is real, and this is part of what's going on right now for me."
Absolutely. Yes. And with this particular listener, I did ask her if she was comfortable sharing an example
Mhm,
of something she might be dealing with, and, she brought up, and I found this very interesting,
mhm,
for a couple of reasons, but, so she brought up that a very close family member had recently been given a really scary diagnosis.
mhm,
And Sarah, I couldn't help but think about our previous episode that we did on fear when you shared personally your own experience with your mother's
mhm.
journey through some tough
Yeah.
diagnoses. So I was just struck by that. And I don't know if you have any thoughts that you wish to share on that right now or not.
Well,
But life is mysterious.
yes, there are no coincidences, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I don't know if you want me to do this now. I mean, I can certainly share or I can wait, like, kind of what worked for me during that time.
Mhm.
But I don't know if there's other stuff you wanna get into first before we do that.
Sure. Yes. So, that's a great. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, there's a couple other things I wanted to say, and then we'll get into maybe some
Sure.
strategies. And maybe that's where you want to talk more about your own personal example.
Okay.
Um, so one thing that I wanted to mention is that there are so many great resources out there for this idea of leaning into challenges,
Mhm.
leaning into tough times. And I did wanna mention somebody that I have been just learning from this woman for a very long time, and I'm sure a lot of you out there already know her name. But Pema Chodron is someone that I really did want to mention in this, episode. Uh, so Pema Chodron is a Tibetan Buddhist nun and author. And she often focuses her teachings on things like mindfulness, on self compassion, on transformative growth,
Mhm.
those kind of things. And the reason why I'm bringing her up now is that leaning into discomfort is a topic that she discusses in a lot of her teachings. It's just one of those common threads, whether she's talking about mindfulness or self compassion. She talks a lot about leaning into difficulty, leaning into discomfort. And I would like to, if it's okay with you, I
Mhm.
just want to share a quote from her. I won't read the whole thing,
Okay.
but I do feel like thinking about our topic today, thinking about the question our listener brought to us, I feel like it might be helpful.
Mhm.
So I'm reading something from it's called the Pocket Pema Chodron. And it's just this beautiful little book with chock full of her teachings. And there is one that she has titled Difficulty is Inevitable.
Hmm.
And so I just want to read part of it. On a very basic level, all beings think that they should be happy. When life becomes difficult or painful, we feel that something has gone wrong. But according to the Buddhist teachings, difficulty is inevitable in human life. For one thing, we cannot escape the reality of death, but there are also the realities of aging, of illness, of not getting what we want, and of getting what we don't want. These kind of difficulties are facts of life. But the Buddhist teachings also say that this is not really what causes us the misery in our lives. What causes misery is always trying to get away from the facts of life, always trying to avoid pain and seek happiness. this sense of ours that there could be lasting security and happiness available to us if we could only do the right thing. So I'll stop there.
Mhm,
It goes on, but I feel that this speaks directly, at least to kind of the message I would like to bring forth today, to our listener and to anyone else that may be resonating with some of what we're talking about here today. Is that I think if we could start to see difficulty, if we could start to see discomfort as an opening for transformation, as an opening for, okay, I'm feeling really shitty right now. What do I have to learn,
mhm.
right? What am I missing? Um, that that shift in, oh God, here's the discomfort. What can I do to get rid of it? To, oh, right, this sucks.
Mhm.
What do I need to do for myself right now? To me, that's in addition to what you had brought up, like first kind of like being aware of it and naming it.
Mhm.
To me, that's maybe a second step, right? Is like, okay, now how do I shift this so I see it as something kind of new, and maybe more helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is viewing it more as an opportunity, whether that's an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for connection or closeness, or even, confronting things that maybe we've shied away from.
Right.
Mm.
Right, exactly. And the other reason I brought up that quote was because it kind of, it started by talking about how we think we're supposed to just always be happy.
Right.
Is that really true?
Yeah, and that's kinda what I meant when I said, like, life is hard, but we look at other people and we say, "Oh my gosh, look at their life is so great." And I think one of the things that I've heard, I mean, and I've heard this, it's been interesting. I've heard this throughout my entire therapy career is and I what I think when I first heard it, I remember I was very new, like maybe 6 months into being a therapist out of grad school. And I had a client who said, "I wanna be a therapist," or, "I'm jealous of you, the fact that you're a therapist." I'm like, "Good God, why?" And he says, "Well, because 'cause you're a therapist, you don't have any problems." Like, if you only knew.
If you only knew.
But I think that so you've got the comparative piece, but then you've also, you know, people equate discomfort maybe with dysfunction, and
Yeah.
so they think, well, as an example, like, well, if I'm successful or if I have this or if I have that or I surround myself with these people, then I'm, you know, or like you said, I think you mentioned this maybe before, like if I'm happy, then I'm good. I don't have to worry. And but I think when you're in that mindset, that is when life kind of does throw you a curveball. It might knock your socks off because you've got this mindset of I'm good. What's going on? Like this isn't supposed to happen to me. This happens to other people.
Mhm. Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Yeah. And one other thought I have maybe before, if you feel ready to kind of move into the strategies portion of this,
Mhm.
is that in today's age, especially, I think with technology, although it's certainly not limited to technology, but there are just so many ways to distract ourselves
Yes.
from discomfort, right? And it's I mean, no wonder, right? Like, obviously, if the choice is between watching Netflix and sitting with pain, I get it, right? And I do it sometimes too. I might wanna choose the Netflix.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with Netflix, don't get me wrong. But if we're watching Netflix every night for the next month and we are completely avoiding or in denial about something, right, that is kind of repressed within us, um, it's gonna cause a problem.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think and I see this I think back to being a kid, and I won't date myself here, but there I didn't have these distractions growing up. I mean, I almost had to create the
Right.
distraction,
Yeah, exactly.
which in and of itself, I mean, it forces creativity and you're
Mhm.
thinking and you're using your brain, but now it is so easy to just tune out. And it like you said, I mean, using kind of the Netflix example, I do that, I've done that, and it gives you this sense of I mean, I this is how I've felt when I've done it, like numbness,
Yeah,
but when you do that for too long, again, that freight train comes and reality hits, and it's like, "Oh, this is I'm back in life, and this is hard."
exactly. Exactly, and, we're both picking on Netflix, but
I
there's
know.
so many ways we do this,
Yes,
right? Whether it's alcohol, whether it's food, whether it's, like, over socializing even, right? Like, just going out every night. I mean, it's endless the ways we can distract ourselves from the pain,
yes,
but the irony is that, at least what I've found in my own experience and also working with clients, the irony is that when we run from the pain or the fear, it only gets stronger.
exactly, exactly, and not only does it get stronger, it follows you, like, you might think you're dodging it, um,
Mhm.
but it's almost like it's chasing after you because there's this I don't know how to describe it here, but it's like this little puppy not probably good puppies are adorable, so maybe not a puppy, but but this little monster chasing after you that you're
Right.
trying to escape versus if you just turned around and faced that monster, you're gonna
Mm,
realize it's tiny. It's not a yeti,
yes.
it's tiny.
Yes. Exactly. So does this feel like a good time to kind of move into maybe some more just ideas or strategies that we can give listeners to, again, it's that finding that balance, right? To go back to the listener's question, it's that sweet spot, right, where you're you're leaning in.
Mhm.
I really like that term too. You're leaning in. So it's not that we're suggesting you have to just be in pain all day, right? But you find that kind of sweet spot between leaning into this discomfort so that it can start to dissipate and then not become so all consuming
Mhm.
and unhealthy, which is the other, that's more irony for you, right? Like I think sometimes the more we repress something, actually then the more it's going to spin in our minds
Yes.
and become kind of like this anxious loop.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess to start, one of the things that you mentioned the listener's quote in terms of feeling, like she has no control.
Yes.
And I do this with clients a lot and I've had to remind myself, but I think there's a balance because there are plenty of things that we do not have control over. And we don't have influence, we don't have control, but there are things we do have control over.
Mhm. Mhm.
And even if that's something as minuscule as, well, I get to choose what I wear today, or I get to choose, you know, what beverage I'm going to have, if I'm going to have juice or if I'm going to have water. And when I say that, people kind of laugh at me and they're like, seriously, Sarah? And I'm like, but it's important because it's important to know that you do have some control and you have control over your being.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that was something especially related to my mom, and I will say it's been very interesting even, like, the last time my mom was diagnosed with cancer, she even said to me, she's like, "Oh my god, you're handling this very well." And and I'm not wishing this on anyone, like, you just get used to it kind of thing. But I this is what I did is I said, "Okay, what is in my control and what
Yep.
is not?" And I will say one of the biggest things that helped me was realizing my parents, both of them, are very they take really good care of themselves. I mean, they are not perfect by, by
Mhm.
any means, but if something is wrong, they address it. They don't let it go. They don't say, well, we'll see what happens." And that has been a really big comfort to me because knowing that they take this stuff, their health seriously, has given me comfort to say they're taking control of what they can. They're not ignoring things. I think keeping the dialogue open with both my parents has been huge, um,
Mm.
even when it's hard. And I think I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, like I'm a crier, so
Mhm.
this isn't easy for me. Like to sit down and have these conversations. Generally, the first thing I do is cry, and then
Mhm.
and then the words come. Um, I think, and by talking about that, I think it's it 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 it's honoring the experience, um, because there's no I say this about grief, and we haven't touched on grief, but there's no right or wrong way to kinda navigate your discomfort. Now, I say that, and I'm gonna, of course, put a caveat to that. If you're out there hurting yourself for someone else, that's not okay. If you're
Right.
lashing out because you're not comfortable.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it's important to honor, like, okay, like our listener has gotten a diagnosis, for a family member. That's hard. Acknowledge that it's hard. Acknowledge that it's scary. Acknowledge that there may be, what's the fear? Is there fear for the family member? Is there fear for herself? Um, Much like I mentioned in the last episode, I was fearful for my mom, for her life, but then I was fearful for me because I'm thinking,
Mhm.
okay, what does this mean? Like what is my health going to look like now?
Mhm.
Um, I also think one of the biggest things that helped me and continues to help is I chunk things down, meaning, um, it was very interesting. This was, I don't know how many years ago this was now, but it was probably it was when my mom had breast cancer, but then it metastasized into her lungs, and she was in the Brigham, and it was incredibly hard for me. I would literally go to work in the morning, and I always got to work early because that was when I could get most things done before everyone else came in. And I would spend, like, my first hour crying in my office, trying to work. And then my colleague who was next door, and we actually had a door that, to each other's offices, and he would just be like he thought someone died, and I just wasn't talking about it. And I finally shared with him what was going on. And being a private person, that was hard for me because I'm not good at mixing, like, work and
Mm.
personal. But I will say him asking me or even just saying that someone he thought someone's had passed was actually it opened the door for me. So that was huge because I didn't feel as alone at work with my struggle because I had someone that was willing to listen and cared. And I think the other thing I wanna throw out there, and I don't know if this is helpful for the listener that, um, requested this in particular, but I do think it's really important to know your own limits. Um, and when I say that, one of the hardest things for me was when my mom was in the hospital, and not just it's when my parents end up in the hospital at all. When she was in the Brigham, I went once to see her. Um, I was so anxious, I was so uncomfortable, and one of the things that they had to do she had to get up and walk. Um, and she's got her IV and the nurse is like, "Don't you wanna come with her?" I'm like, "Nope."
Mm.
And she's like, "You don't?" I'm like, "Nope." And because I couldn't I probably would have thrown up on her.
Mhm,
or
mhm,
passed out or something. I was just I wanted to see my mom, but I wanted to get the hell out of that hospital as soon as I could. And I think knowing my limits around that and knowing, okay, this is not like I can still be connected to her, but I don't have to be there. And she knew, my parents knew, my husband knew, like, okay, this is not your thing. Like, this is really hard for you.
mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so I think that's really important because it's, knowing what you can tolerate and what you can't. And like you're saying, this is the idea of leaning in. Like, if you can go and say, spend 10 minutes at the hospital, great. But if you can't spend 4 hours, don't spend 4 hours,
Right.
and it's being gracious to yourself, but it's also being gracious to that person because I am guessing my mother could tell. It was probably written all over my face that all I wanted to do was run.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I love what you're sharing right now because what's coming to my mind, Sarah, is that it sounds like you were really practicing some true self-compassion, right? And rather than putting maybe these expectations on yourself that weren't reasonable, right? 4 hours in a hospital, you knew what you could do, you knew what you could offer, and it sounds like your mother very much
Mm,
understood that,
yeah.
right? So absolutely know your limitations.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, when you're leaning into a challenge like that, oh my gosh, do you need to be loving with yourself?
Yes. Yeah, and I think you bring up that's a really good point in terms of being loving with yourself because it when I heard you say that, that brought me back to the beginning kind of where when I responded, people think sometimes discomfort is associated with dysfunction.
Mm,
And, again, like everyone goes through challenges. And some people are great about talking about them and others aren't. And I think it's also knowing your style, and knowing like one thing I remember too is that this was at my old house when this happened, and I lived on a dead end, so everyone knows your business. And I was on I think I was the vice president of our lake association at the time, and we had a meeting, and it was after the meeting, and the secretary looked at me or the treasurer, one of them says, "Sarah, how are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm fine." I'm like, "What's up?" And they're like, "Well, how's your mom?" And I was like, "Oh."
mm,
And I wasn't ready. I didn't wanna talk with them about it, and I was really short, and I was really snappy, and I was insulted. I have no idea why I was insulted because I shouldn't have been. It I think it was more I was feeling vulnerable that I was like,
sure.
"Enough, like, we're not talking about this. I don't feel
Mhm.
comfortable talking about this with you." And, again, hindsight, like, in the moment, I had an amygdala moment where it was like, "I'm fine, leave me alone, we're not talking about this." Later, it was, okay, that came from a place of compassion and caring, like, they weren't doing it to
Mm,
they were genuinely concerned, and I couldn't handle that. So I think that's the other piece of it too in terms of knowing yourself, but taking a breath and slowing things down and saying, "Okay, what's going on here?" Am I reacting? Like, how am I reacting? Because
right.
again, it's we have control over ourselves. Um, what is this person's intention? And, I think one of the things that happens when life can be hard is you've got people who say things and they may not say something the best way, but it's generally coming from a good place.
Mhm,
And I think
mhm,
that's something we have to remember because when we're not comfortable, we are oftentimes trying to control everything to be comfortable.
right. Absolutely. Yep, there's that control again.
Right.
And, you know, Pema Chodron talks a lot about the fact that we try to control the uncontrollable
Mm,
by kind of constantly looking for security and predictability. Um, Kind of getting back to that idea of always hoping to feel comfortable and safe. But the reality of this life, right, is that we can never fully avoid uncertainty.
right.
We can never fully avoid unpredictability. You know, you you had zero control over your mother's health journey,
Mhm,
just like my listener has zero control over her mother's health journey.
right.
But I think then the question becomes, okay, then what do we do with that?
Mm,
Um, how do we learn to accept it as our teacher? And again, it doesn't mean you love it.
exactly, exactly, and I think that's one of the things, is interesting when for some reason, when you just said, um, accepting her mother's health journey, one of the things that popped up is and I think this translates to a lot of things, but it's also respecting that person's choices, how they
Mhm.
choose to navigate their journey, because
Mm.
it might not be how you would choose to navigate that journey.
Ah, yeah, absolutely.
And that
Right.
and that can bring up a lot of discomfort because they might not be doing things the way you want them to do it, or
Mhm.
they might not be whether it's handling something the way you would or thinking about something the way you would, um, and that can be hard because you're already in this place of, "Okay, I don't like this, this isn't comfortable," and again, it comes back to that, like, you're trying to control the things you can't control.
Right. Right. So it's like you're pointing to that idea again of, you know, how do I accept? And in this case, what you're talking about, how do I accept maybe if my mother or whomever,
Mhm.
right, is maybe handling something differently than I would. You don't have to love it, but if that's their choice, then how do I learn to live with that and to respond from like the best place possible?
Yes.
The health or best isn't the right word. I'm gonna change that to healthiest,
Mhm.
right? Like the healthiest place possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
If it's okay with you, there are just a couple other things I wanted to mention in terms of tools or strategies,
Mhm.
um, that can I think that can help us lean in, and all of these are related, right? But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention meditation
Yep.
because I'm a huge proponent of it, and, I really wanna be clear that when I suggest to clients that they just practice, even if it's 2 minutes a day of meditation, I'm not talking about, "Okay, practice 2 minutes of just emptying your mind of every single thought."
Mhm.
I'm actually talking about the opposite. To me, one aspect of meditation that I like to practice is to sit in stillness and just be with whatever is,
Mm.
right? So if I wake up and I'm really cranky, um, when I sit down for my morning meditation, because that's when I do meditate, I'm not sitting down necessarily to empty my mind of whatever cranky thoughts I'm having. Oh, I mean, it's nice if they decide to release on their own, but it's more about practicing that acceptance piece of just being with whatever is coming up for you. And to me, that's more important than meditating to be happy.
Mm.
Um, and so there's so many resources out there and experts far more advanced than I am on teaching meditation. And I think in the show notes we'll definitely include some resources there. But cultivating a meditation practice, and again, even if it's only 2 or 5 minutes a day, I think can be incredibly helpful.
I was gonna say I agree with that, and one of the things and I think we will this is probably one that we'll throw in the show notes, but I found reading Eckhart Tolle was very helpful during, and again, it would be I could it wasn't long, it would be like 5 minutes, it would
Mhm.
and I would
Mhm.
literally just read a sentence at a time, and for whatever
Yep.
reason, I just found his work to be incredibly calming for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. The power of now is such a great resource for anyone that's interested in just exploring, right? This idea of kind of slowing down our thoughts. So I love that he was one of your go-tos. One other thing I want to mention, and this seems like a no-brainer, but maybe it's not,
Mm,
is that um, when we're facing challenges, we really do, and you mentioned this earlier, like with your work experience, it's incredibly helpful to have, even if it's a small support system, but just a person or 2 or 3 that you really trust, that you can talk to, that understands and knows your experience to the best that they can without being you.
mhm.
Um, and it's I would throw therapy in there too. Not that you have to go to therapy when you're experiencing discomfort, but therapy can be incredibly useful to just have that safe space, right? Where you're entering into a place where you can tell your story, you can share your feelings, you can shine the light, gently shine the light on your discomfort. And hopefully, if the therapist knows what they're doing, they'll be able to really deeply listen and reflect back to you some key things that might be helpful. Um, so, support system and therapy, I think I would absolutely recommend to anybody that's facing some real challenges.
I would agree with that, and it's making me think of 2 more strategies, but to me, they're
Mm,
intertwined. One is the idea of impermanence, meaning this too shall pass. And impermanence, especially like you mentioned in terms of like a from a Buddhist standpoint, can be taken a little bit differently than the way I'm thinking at the moment. But I think realizing and I'm gonna say this is gonna be an interesting example. When we're going through difficult times or we're leaning into that discomfort, maybe we think of it like a shit sandwich. So so we've got the good, we've got the positive, we've got the things that we're comfortable with. Then in the middle is the yuck. And then we end with, okay, we're back in like I feel like I'm in a decent space again.
mm,
And that's an example of impermanence. Like the shit sandwich in the middle part, that's the yuck. And if we think of, well, wait a minute, I felt okay in the past, I'm going to feel okay again in the future. And I think the other thing that this reminds me of, and it makes me think of a couple of my clients in particular who have a lot going on, a lot of different balls in the air in terms of different aspects of life, like not just maybe work being crazy, but work, maybe, homes, family life,
mm,
social situations. Trust in your faith, whatever that is. And I'm not saying that from a religious standpoint. If you are religious and that works for you, that's great. But more from that spiritual higher power, whatever that is for you. If it's the universe, if it's God, if it's the trees, because I think that I've seen it be very, very helpful and powerful. And much like when you said earlier, even the listener's example, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, when you shared that example with me, I was like, it took me back. I was like, "That this
mm,
is not
mhm,
lost on me that this is coming up,"
mhm,
especially after
mhm.
I used that example
Right.
last episode, and, I looked at it as I have a choice. I have a choice to ignore this and pretend that, this doesn't bring up stuff for me,
Mm,
or I could use this as an opportunity, again, that opportunity thing to help other people, but also help myself grow because that is not that is not something that's easy, and there was a reason why this was presented to us right now.
I love that. Yes. Yeah, that was not lost on me either. When that was the example she shared, I was like, wow. Um, and one other quick thing I'll just piggyback on, and you kind of were talking about this a minute ago. I think that when we learn how to lean into discomfort, we are building an incredibly useful skill, and it's called resilience,
Yes. Yes.
right? Because you learn, and that's kind of what you were saying before about I think another really empowering thing you can do is when we're facing something really scary, you stop and you ask yourself, well, okay, has there ever been a time in my life, maybe it doesn't have to be the same exact scenario that you're experiencing now, but when have I been in a scary place before? And how did I come through? Right? This, like you said, this too shall pass. And when we really start to take that approach or shift our mindset to a place of resilience, it's amazing how maybe it may be subtle, but maybe the next time you're faced with a major stressor or challenge, it's still going to be hard, right? It still might feel awful for a hot minute, but maybe you move through it a little quicker.
Mhm.
Or maybe you've added more tools to your toolbox to pull from when you need them. Um, Maybe you've learned how to be a little more vulnerable with people you trust
Mhm.
so that you can talk about the challenge or the discomfort. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, great point. Resilience is huge. I mean, and if you think about the, again, opportunity by leaning into these things, it teaches us, like you said, resilience, but it this is another form of growth. This is, a way to kind of lay your foundation, if you will, for handling I mean, there's always going to be challenges out there. Some are gonna be easier than others. But knowing that you have built this skill set up essentially is important.
I love it. Yeah. Is there any other strategy you wanted to mention?
Um, no, I think the only other thing I would throw out there is just the importance of being present. Because it's easy when we're leaning into discomfort to have an anxiety about leaning into it. And, and maybe like we were saying earlier, you don't want to spend so much time that it becomes unhealthy. I think it is about staying present and grounding, which essentially is, what you were mentioning too in terms of the meditation. I think that is a way
Mm,
to do that.
absolutely. Yeah. And so, Sarah, I think just the last thing I will mention is you know, the amazing ability we have these days to learn from the experts.
Mhm.
There are so many kind of amazing authors and thought leaders in this field, or at least that talk about this idea of leaning into challenges that I do want to mention. And I'll, again, we'll be sure to put them in the show notes. But I'll just end with a couple to throw out to people right now, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, great.
So I already mentioned Pema Chodron.
Mhm.
Absolutely love her. And a couple of the books I would highly recommend with regard to this topic. One book is called When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times. And another very popular book of hers is called The Places That Scare You.
Mm.
She has others too, but those are just two that I wanted to mention. I would also give a shout out to Brene Brown, and I know we've talked about her in the past, but she has a book called The Gifts of Imperfection. And I think another one of hers is Daring Greatly. Um, she's another great author to explore if you haven't yet already around this topic. Tara Brach is another one that I would highly recommend. She has a book called Radical Acceptance. I love the title of it, Radical Acceptance. And then the last one I will mention is an author by the name of Michael Singer, and he wrote a book called The Surrender Experiment that I really enjoyed. I haven't read it in years, but I think the premise is just he went on this kind of quest to just surrender to everything happening in his life, and it is quite a fascinating read.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So those are just a few. I have some others that we'll put in the show notes. But yeah, any last words for you?
No, I think we're good. I just hope that everyone enjoyed our episode today. I hope they got something from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, listeners, and tune in for our next episode when Sarah and I talk about cultivating self compassion. So take care, everyone.
Thank you. If you want to share your thoughts or ideas with us, you can email us at therapyunpluggedpodcast@proton.me. Until next time, be sure to subscribe to Therapy Unplugged Empowerment, Laughter, and Life on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts.